religious beliefs, their spiritual beliefs, philosophy, all those reasons. That can't be tolerated either. And we will collectively fight for and secure that right.
Yes.
In the coming years, we are, and specifically in the coming year, we are going to be paying more and more attention to guilty pleas. We have a guilty plea public education campaign that started this January and will continue as we work to educate the country about the fact that innocent people plead guilty much more than anybody believes or expects and are spending many years in prison for crimes they didn't commit. So we began this campaign with 13 videos that were posted online. I hope you all began to see them. And there was a total of 1.5 million video views on Facebook and 46,500 page views to the guiltypleaproject.org. And this campaign is just beginning. We know that about 95% of felony convictions in the United States and at least, and actually more, misdemeanor convictions are obtained by guilty pleas. 15%, or 18%, I should say, of the known exonerees, according to the registry, were people that pled guilty. 11% of our DNA exonerations were people who pled guilty. Pleading guilty in many states remains a bar to compensation. Pleading guilty in many states remains a bar to access to DNA testing. Pleading guilty, unfortunately, in many states can be a bar to take a writ. And pleading guilty, unfortunately, in many jurisdictions is either a bar or at least a very high hurdle to a conviction integrity unit or a conviction review unit to even undertake to look at your case. So there is a tremendous amount of public education we have to do on this issue and call on everyone to raise awareness and again help change these laws.
And there's a lot we're going to do next year to prevent future wrongful convictions. You know, we think about how almost half the states now have implemented meaningful eyewitness reform. That's great, but it means that there's another half of the states in this country that haven't. And we expect you all to redouble your efforts to accomplish a lot of that in the next year. The same applies to interrogations. About half the states now mandate recording. Let's get it with the rest of the states in this country. And not just mandating recording, but people are now starting to say, you know what? We should approach the whole thing about interrogations differently. One organization that trains cops all over the country has given up the Reed method as part of their teaching because they know it's responsible for so many miscarriages of justice. There's one state, Oregon, which is considering a statute or that will make it more difficult to use those same tactics. Tactics involving lying to people during interrogations if they're juveniles. But the whole notion of being able to do that, whether you're a juvenile or an adult, is offensive and it needs to be changed. And the same is true about forensic science. And with all these things, it's fighting in the courts, it's fighting in the legislature, it's fighting in the executive branches at the state and local level. And with forensic science, it's real simple in the courts and in the law. Okay? It's not about being a Republican or being a Democrat. It's that what we're demanding is that the forensic methods that are used all over the country are evidence-based and are not the result of dogma, which is currently the status quo.
Very briefly, we just have to do better at compensating the wrongly convicted. We just have to do better. You know, and it's always fascinating to me that Texas, where we get more people out than anywhere, you know, they made the decision in the legislature with the chair of our board, Rodney Ellis, and support from Republicans that, you know, you get $80,000 in cash, $80,000 in annuity, $160,000 per year for every year you were in. And, you know, you get it automatically if you get an innocence finding. And that is that's worked. There aren't a lot of these civil rights lawsuits there. It could be better, right? You get money when you're on parole too. I think you get $80,000 a year or something for the parole. But the point is, we have to do a lot more getting compensation in all the different states. One thing, though, that I think we can be very proud of, as you saw from the masks, is that as a community, we are getting better. We could be better still at really healing people once they get out and giving them support. And there's a lot of wonderful organizations within this network and people dedicated to get that done.
You know, our policy at this network has always been data-driven in conjunction with the most powerful narratives. 2 weeks ago, the National Registry on Exonerations issued a white paper on the role that race plays in wrongful convictions. I urge you all to pick it up, to download it, and read it. The data is extraordinary. It shows that exonerees who are black are way out of proportion in their numbers to the frequency of black people in our society. In fact, it's out of proportion to the number of black people who actually spend time in our nation's prisons. The data shows that official misconduct is much more common for our black exonerees than it was for anyone else. The same data shows that if you're innocent and black, it's going to take longer to prove your innocence and get you out of prison and win your freedom than if you are white. And then let's not forget the powerful data that they have reported on sexual assaults in America. The bottom line statistic is quite sobering. Black defendants convicted of raping white women are 8 times more likely to be innocent than white men convicted of sexual assault on women of their own race. 8 times more likely. Now, some people might suggest that this is the result of cross-racial identification, but I think history tells us a very different story. We all know that for a long time, instead of talking about it being rape, it was simply called the usual crime when a black man stood in the docket faced with a sexual assault charge against a white woman. We've all recently seen the stories revisiting the horrible tragedy of Emmett Till. And we all know that more than half of the lynchings, actually almost 90% of the lynchings, were of black men who allegedly either looked at, gestured improperly, or behaved improperly toward a white woman. Particularly in the last several months, when racist rhetoric is on the increase, we have an obligation to use this data as a starting point, to not shy away from talking about race, but actually grabbing it and moving with it, and joining in coalitions with other groups that are much more involved on a day-to-day basis with racial justice than we are, and lend ourselves to be part of that movement to address these problems. Sure, we have a lane to stay in, it's the innocence lane, but to ignore the issue of race and the role it played in so many wrongful convictions is just no longer acceptable. Thank you.
The last segment, we're just about done. But first, we have to correct an error from last night. And that is the San Antonio 4. Elizabeth Ramirez, Christy Milley, Cassandra Rivera, Anna Vasquez, was convicted in the late 1990s of family review of Go see the movie Southwest of Salem, in case you're the San Antonio Poor, and I know I speak for all my friends in Texas. What a victory from the Court of Criminal Appeals. Beyond all expectations, an outright declaration of innocence. Thank you. So the last topic, very briefly, and Peter began to advert to it, is these are difficult times. We know what's coming, do we not? Valerie Jarrett is not in the West Wing of the White House, all right? We no longer have the executive branch actively and enthusiastically supporting our movement. So the question becomes, for us and many others in this country, how do we organize resistance to oppression? All of us face that question, I think, in various different areas of the criminal justice reform movement and in all kinds of movements in this country. So we ask the question, what is the role of this movement? And that's not so easy to figure out, but here are just some watchwords, some thoughts on moving forward. Number one, we have to work in coalition, right? We are good at what we do. We bring something to the table, but we have to work with other allies. You know, whether it's the American Civil Liberties Union or the grassroots race organizations that are forming that Peter talked about, the nonprofits, the people that are out there resisting, right? We have to work in coalition, number one. And by the way, one good example is the effect that the Innocence movement has had on the death penalty, right? We have a story to tell, witness to Innocence. And we work in coalition with the others. So we are a powerful force, and as you can see from all the people here, and the exonerated that walk the land, an increasingly powerful force. We are a political force. So work in coalition. Number two, I think work from the ground up. We have to be involved in communities now. People, the progressive people that are running for the school board, that are running to be state legislatures, to be on the city council, to run for DA. There is a concerted effort in this country, and we are making it to elect people that have progressive agendas on being district attorneys. And that is, if done fairly, one of the great innocence protections of all, right? A fair district attorney who's working with oversight of the police to make them follow the rules and do good investigations. Another thing to look at is knowing our lane. You can't do everything, right? So we should look at those things that we know we do best. So two very specific things to end with. One area which we can focus on are the misdemeanor courts. Because we know, I have never attended any conference with prosecutors where I didn't turn to them and I say, okay, who here thinks that more innocent people are being convicted and pleading guilty in the misdemeanor courts than the felony courts? And all the prosecutors raised their hand. They all started there. You know, we were all public, a lot of us were public defenders, the prosecutors were there, and we all knew that it was a mess, right? And when you dive into reforming the misdemeanor courts, right, you are getting to the issue of bail. You are getting to the issue of guilty pleas. You are getting to the issue of bad lawyering, not just bad lawyering, but non-existent lawyering. You were getting into the issue of bad science, as we started this conference by giving the Journalism Award to Ryan Gabriel and Sandra Topher, who pointed out to us that this presumptive drug tests with huge race effects is literally having people convicted in this country of misdemeanors and felonies by the tens of thousands, and we have to stop it. And then finally, indigent defense. Indigent defense, it seems, is always in crisis and always underfunded. And that could only get worse. And we have to support the indigent defense system and those who are fighting to make it better. But it cannot be uncritical support, because we must stand with those who are really trying to get good lawyering, and we have to be critical even of our allies who are actually not providing that good lawyering, but they're underfunded and they have difficulty providing it. But unless they're willing to fight, right, and unless they're willing to dedicate themselves to providing good defense, we can't be uncritical even of our allies. So I think that's it. and I think we all ought to go drink and dance.
And just stay strong and be creative. Very, very creative. Thank you all.
All right, and before you leave, as is our practice, the very last point of business at our closing plenary is always a save the date for next year. So Rudy, you could run the video.
I had you on the telephone, said you won't be coming home. I heard you went to Tennessee, thought that you'd come back to me, but now I can't wait. No, I can't wait.
No matter where you're from, here you become part of it all, and you leave love struck with a piece of Memphis in your soul.
Next year, March 23rd and 24th in Memphis. And with that, let's go to Stone. Thank you.